Well, I'll just say a quick word then to our panelists, to our attendees that have joined. So I can see a really good number of folks on today from bereavement services organisations all over the UK and Ireland. So thank you guys for giving us your time on during what is obviously a very busy period and challenging period for everybody in your profession. So thank you for that. Delighted to be here again this week, I think third or fourth week in a row with our friends and colleagues at the ICCM, who are kindly giving us their time and share, yours, giving you your time as well, in order that we can share ideas, ask questions, share knowledge, and help each other. So the format is, for those of you that have not been on before, the format is reasonably straightforward. We'll just talk, we've got a few core themes, the planning that a lot of these organisations have done before. We'll try and cover off some of that at the start. We'll ask you guys a quick poll question to get a sense of where you guys are regarding any surge of in demand where in your local areas. And we'll just take questions throughout. So we want it to be really engaging. Ask as many questions as you want. There's a chat, there's a Q&A button. If you go to the bottom of your screen, it might be at the top, depending on your machine. So just press that Q&A button, write in any questions that you've got. No silly questions. I don't mean don't ask any silly questions. I mean, there are no silly questions. And Leona's going to feed those through to Julie and Sophia, and just get you guys the answers that you need. So, think broad. Anything that's affecting you guys can be a legal challenge, a legal oriented thing, physical, so, the physical restraints that you guys have, or be kind of accessing hardware, resources, people, HR, all those kinds of things. Anything that you guys feel you need some advice on, you're very welcome to submit questions there at any point. So don't wait to be asked, just fire questions in. So I'll stop talking for a minute and probably hand over to Julie, give a quick introduction and a hello.
Hello everyone, I'm Julie Dunk. I'm the Chief Executive of the Institute of Cemetery and Crematorium Management. I've been working for the Institute for over 8 years now, and before that worked in bereavement services in various local authorities around the UK. So I've been in the sector for more years than I care to admit, actually. It makes me feel very old when I say that, but it has been a number of years now.
Very good, thank you. And Sophia, probably just a quick hello from yourself.
Yep. Hi, I'm Sophia. I've been working for the Institute since October last year, helping with technical inquiries and producing the journal. Previous to that, I ran Islington Camden Cemetery Services based in London for, I was there 12 years and 5 years at Golders Green Crematorium before that. So obviously been in the industry a long time. And I've joined the Institute in October, so I'm enjoying that so far. Been challenging, but good.
I'm sure. And Leona, most folks on here will know you as well, but just maybe a quick hello from yourself as well.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us, everyone. So I'm one of the founders of Plotbox and Chief Commercial Officer, and just giving Neil a hand here to facilitate some of your questions that you pop through the wee Q&A box there throughout the webinar.
All right, thank you. So what we tend to do at start, just to help set the scene and so on, is just give a flavour of some of the planning, some of the things that we're hearing from local authorities and private organisations in terms of what they've been doing so far. Julie and Sophia, whoever may be best to step in and take this on from where I leave it off. Might just ask you guys to give a little flavour of what you're hearing in general from organisations up and down the country in terms of some of the planning they've been doing. No mention of any names or anything like that, but just to help the guys here, the attendees on the webinar today, just to help them get a flavour of the types of things people are doing, and maybe give them some food for thought regarding questions to ask. I'll just give a summary from what we heard from some of the guys that were on last week. Obviously, there's depending on probably where you are and the circumstances in which you find your local situation. Some of these guys have been obviously closing cemeteries, locking gates, and so on, just to to enable some of that social distancing and control over their facility. We're hearing a lot of organisations upskilling and cross-skilling, so hiring in new people as well, just to to help with the demand as that demand comes through as we hit that surge. Where resources permit, we know we've got teams that are being kind of siloed into team 1, team 2 and 3 and so on, so to stop that cross-contamination, to keep operations running and so on. Of course, all utilisation of any cloud technology, working from home practices where that's possible. We've seen in the news a lot of folks digging plots ahead of time, just in case the teams that normally do that are hit by illness or whatever. So that's a lot of that going on, and of course a lot of helping the funeral directors book remotely, book online and so on. So that's been ongoing as well. So there's a light flavour there. Julie or Sophia, you've probably hearing from your members a lot more than we are. Maybe you can speak to some of that for us.
Yeah, I think can I go first? Is that all right?
Yeah, go.
I think there's so many issues at the moment, isn't there? And I think one of the problems is that we've never been here before, and it's very much an emerging situation. So decisions that were taken probably 2 weeks ago may no longer be the best decision. Right. So it's all the time, it's constant at the moment, having to review the advice that comes out from the government, which isn't always as clear as it may be. So it's all the time sort of re-evaluating the advice that comes out and trying to keep guidance updated. I think for members, one of the biggest tests has been setting up working from home. For a lot of people, the need to protect staff is absolutely paramount. And, to do that, offices have often had to close, which has meant sort of having to sort of suddenly get to grips with new technology. Thinking about ways that forms, for example, can be received and stored. That's been a really huge challenge. We tried in the sort of first couple of weeks of the pandemic, we tried to keep up with the questions that we were being asked regularly by putting an FAQ on our website, but it just got so difficult to keep up with because it changed on a daily basis, and even sometimes on a several times a day basis. So we have still got some key FAQs on there, but we haven't updated it for a while because things just change so rapidly that we can't keep up with it all. So I think, Sophia, do you want to say the sort of most pertinent questions you've been asked this week?
Yeah, I think, like you said, Julie, I think it's a time of, for the best planning in the world, and a lot of local authorities and private companies already have a pandemic plan or a mass excess death plan that's never had to be enacted. And I think it's like anything, the best will in the world on paper doesn't always translate in operational senses. So I think, as you've said, cross-training, I've had people being pulled in from different departments. The future burial planning, I've had people say they're doing it in stages, so they've got a bit like an amber, green and red stage. So as we go through this and deaths increase, they can then roll out their plan in stages, which seems to be like a sensible idea. So at the moment, and again, geographically, it varies. There are some places like London that have been hit obviously a lot harder than other places. So where they've been able to keep time slots and have services, they've kept that in place until it increases, and they'll reduce service times. And then the third stage, we have no services at all. So I think a lot of people have had a planned approach, a staged approach, which I think is quite sensible. And the comforting, everyone's quite similar in that respect. They're all talking from the same hymn sheet, for want of a better term. In terms of social distancing, in terms of restricting numbers, but still wanting to give a service where possible. I think that's been quite a consistent message across the sector, private or public. So I think that's been really good as well.
I think that's one of the hardest things for our members to deal with, actually, is the restrictions on them from being able to do what they would normally do. You know, our instinct, excuse me, our instinct is to care for people. That's why we do the job, and we're being prevented from doing that at the moment. So it's very hard to be a bereavement services professional at the moment, because our hands are sort of tied behind our back, metaphorically. We can't get close to people. We can't provide that shoulder they need, that comfort they need. And I think, you know, it's a whole new headset really for us. It's a caring profession, isn't it? And you know, we are being prevented from sort of doing what we would normally do. And I think, you know, I certainly find that really hard and frustrating, and I'm not on the front line anymore. So I can see from the list of people listening in, there's a lot of people who are on the front line who've joined in. It'd be interesting to know how they feel about that and what they're doing to kind of overcome that. I think what we are seeing as well is a certain amount of creativity, and people are thinking of ways they can continue to help and provide some sort of control over the funeral service. And I think that's absolutely vital at a time where people are not allowed to visit loved ones in hospital. I know Matt Hancock has now said that they're going to allow people in to be with someone when they're dying, but I'm not quite sure how they're going to achieve that. But there's been an acknowledgement that people are not, you know, they're really missing out on having any sort of control. And I think from our point of view, if we can provide an element of control over the funeral, even if it's just still allowing people to choose the right music for them, you know, whether it's been able to show the funeral via a webcast, or making a recording of it, or simply taking a photograph of the coffin in the chapel and emailing that to someone to give them reassurance that we are still treating people as people. You know, I don't know if you heard the Archbishop of Canterbury's sermon on Easter, I think it was Easter Sunday, where he pleaded for crematoria to not just treat people like cattle, like we did in the foot and mouth, which was quite upsetting actually, because we've never done that and we never would do that. But that puts an image in people's minds, and they may then start questioning, well, what is going on at the crematorium? I can't be there, I can't see what's happening. So people need reassurance that actually we are still maintaining very high standards, and we're treating everybody as an individual and doing our very best for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so following on that point there, regarding, you know, the implications of a surge and so on, whether that's, you know, perceived or actual. I'm just going to launch a poll here, and I can see some questions coming in. So we'll just deal with this poll first, and we'll launch this now. So from where you guys are locally, let us know, have you guys started to see a surge in demand for burial and cremation? Just answer there, yes or no. What's been quite interesting is that we've seen these results, as you'd probably expect, kind of ebb and flow over the last 2 or 3 weeks. At the start it was very much obviously no, because it was early stages, but that proportion kind of moving slightly over the last week or two. Now we've always got different groups of people on here, so you know, it's never kind of like for like, but there's definitely been a trend towards yes, and we've got a good number of you guys on today, so let's see where we are now. So we're at about the same point where we were last week. We're at about a 60-40 split. So 60% of you saying no surge right now, but 40% of you saying yes, you are. So that's you know, 40% of organisations in this group are seeing that spike, and it would be great if you guys are able to, you know, use the chat box there, use the Q&A box. Fire in questions. We're going to see more and more coming in, and we're going to get to those right now. But even if you don't have a question, and you know, there's something you'd like to share about your experiences around that surge and what it's been like dealing with that, you know, maybe it's something that caught you guys unawares that, you know, you didn't anticipate. Just to share that with the group, even if they're just statements, we can read those out and have those answered. So. We've got a couple here. I'm going to hand over to Leona, and she can relay those to the group.
Yep, I've got 3 in here now. First one in from Nick. Will allowing people to visit before the death not result in further delays in the funeral taking place?
I don't think so, because if they're visiting before death, that shouldn't impact on the funeral. No, I can't see that it would delay the funeral. And I think, you know, funeral directors are very much on message, and are advising families now that they shouldn't delay making funeral arrangements. I think perhaps in the early days of the lockdown, people were reluctant to make a quick funeral arrangement, because they thought that probably after 3 weeks they'd be allowed out of the lockdown and would then be able to attend the funeral. But obviously delaying making those arrangements is putting pressure on the whole deceased management system in terms of perhaps storage, either at the hospital mortuary or the funeral director premises. So I think, you know, the message coming out from government now is that they would expect funeral arrangements to be made as quickly as possible. But I don't see how allowing somebody to visit somebody who is dying, I don't see how that would actually impact on the funeral process. So
and I also think, no, I don't. I think it's just a process that they would have to sort out how to get someone in and out of a hospital. And then the death would occur as normal. And I think people were delaying it because they themselves were in isolation. So they were thinking, if I can't come out for 2 weeks, so I won't start the arrangements for 2 weeks. And so there was this backlog of self-isolation as well. But as time goes on, it's evident that, you know, lockdown's obviously going to be extended. Social distancing measures are still going to be in place. Restrictions are still going to be there. So like you said, Julie, the backlog and storage of the amount of people that are dying, it's just not going to be possible. As with normal, people can delay funerals, but I just don't think it's going to be possible. So.
Okay, good. Leona, I know there's more here, so thanks so far we've got Debbie, Fiona, Andy, Graham, Kevin, Elaine, Sarah, Martin. We've got all of these here, so we're gonna work through them and keep them coming, folks. Leona, over to you for the next one.
Yep. I'll go with one from Andy, because I know Andy has only got a few more minutes left and has a meeting. So where we have a surge in demand, how can the private sector operators and local authorities work together more effectively to ensure families have access to service halls and crematoria without having to wait 2 weeks or more?
Andy, that's a very good question. I think, to be honest, a lot of this will be coordinated through local resilience forums. I don't know if you've had contact with yours, but it would be hoped that they would have an angle on what is available locally and would be able to actually put people in touch with each other. So if, for example, you suddenly found yourselves without gravediggers, but the cemetery down the road, you know, has people that can help, you would hope that the local resilience forum would be able to do that. If you haven't had any contact from your local resilience forum, I would suggest that you do contact them. Contact details are on the .gov website. If you just Google local resilience forums, it will bring up a page with all the contact details on. I know some sites have their own kind of internal, as Sophia said, they'll have a sort of traffic light system. So in the first instance, they might approach their neighbouring facilities for support, and then it may get taken out of their hands. You know, somebody higher up may come along and take over anyway. But some I think, certainly when I was at Bournemouth, we had arrangements with our neighbours' pool so that we would help each other out in those circumstances. And I can't see any. Well, I would hope there would be no difference between private and public sector in this. We all need to work together, whoever pays our wages, basically. And you'd like to think that as a sector, ownership is irrelevant at this time.
I would echo that, Julie, because at Islington we had local arrangements that we made. I mean, in London there's 5 crematoria within 1.5 miles of each other, and we all, as managers of those sites, used to work. We all know each other really well. We all work together. We all share information. And when we put our pandemic plan together at the time, part of that planning was to contact the neighbouring cemeteries and crems to see, you know, would in any kind of circumstance, you know, your machine breaks down and you forget a pandemic, but you can't cremate your own residents. Would they step in with this sharing arrangement was in place already? So even outside of this, it's always good to have that in place for other circumstances. And they weren't all local authorities, they were a mixture of local authorities and private CREMs, and we all worked very well together. And like you said, I think the mindset is the same, whether it's private or local authority, and it's having that relationship and networking in place, which I think a lot of us do.
Yeah, I would say if anyone is in trouble, if they are struggling and need some support, then just pick up the phone, give your nearest neighbour a call, and I'm sure you'll find, well, I would hope you would find a friendly response. And say it's really important that we do help each other out at this time. So if there's any difficulties, try your neighbours first, and if that doesn't work, you can always come to the Institute and we'll see if we can provide some support for you.
Great, thank you for that. I've got a couple here that are kind of linked, so I'm going to ask them together. Fiona Morris, should there be a limit to the number of mourners permitted at the graveside? And Kevin Watkins, have anyone in the group closed their gates to the cemetery?
I think in terms of, because I've been asked that a lot actually during this last couple of weeks regarding burials particularly, as opposed to being in a chapel. And there is still social distancing measures. Just because you're outside, there is a sort of false sense of security or safety that people feel because they're outside. But the whole point of the lockdown and people not being able to go to parks and sunbathe and just because you're outside, it is still about social distancing. So depending, and every site is different as to what they can accommodate and how they, how their sites are planned out in terms of how people can stand. But there is going to be a restriction in number because you can't have 100 people. You still need to restrict it. You still need to make sure that separate households are at least 2 meters apart. You have to protect your staff more as well. That's the other thing with the difference between parks and cemeteries, which is again another conversation I seem to have had a lot of, is that there are staff based in cemeteries and not so much in parks. So they still need to backfill. They still need to deal with what happens after a funeral, and therefore they're always waiting for mourners to leave with the greatest dignity and respect, and people hanging around in groups. And what happens is people start off 2 meters apart and they end up drifting, as do, especially in a funeral situation, given what it's about. They end up drifting into a group, and then it's very hard to manage and enforce because you don't want to get close yourself. So I think it's still important to make sure that you have a manageable number, and that will vary depending on site because some places are bigger, some places are smaller, some places don't have staff resources to manage it. So it's equally as important outside as it is inside.
And also people should be following the government's guidance, which does restrict the type of people who can attend a funeral. So it can only be somebody from the same household, close family, or if there is nobody in those categories, then some friends can attend. The government haven't put a number on funeral attendance, but the intention is that numbers are limited to as low as possible, and that it's for the family to decide who can go within that kind of framework that they provide. Obviously, some authorities have set limits, and that's perfectly valid. We've advised all along that you should take a risk-based approach, do a risk assessment based on the size of your facilities, the number of staff you have, the availability of PPE to provide your staff to protect them, your ability, if you're still allowing services in a chapel, can you clean that chapel adequately between services? So you have to take all these things into account and then decide what the best number that you're going to allow is. And I know some crematoria have taken the decision that they've had to stop any attendance at all, and some are actually just having people can congregate outside of the chapel, but they're not allowed in the chapel. So there's a whole variety of responses out there, which is absolutely valid. And if that's the decision that your authority has come to, then that's fine. It may change. Things may change as we go on. It may be that one of the problems we're having is getting any sort of accurate model in at the moment. So it's only speculative as to how many excess deaths we're actually going to be dealing with. We just don't know at this stage. And are we at the peak? Are we past the peak? We don't know. We keep seeing different figures in the press. What we would hope is that we've sort of sort of peaked and that we'll start sort of seeing fewer deaths, but we just don't know at this stage. If we get a lot more, if we continue to have a high number of deaths, it may be that the powers in the Coronavirus Act are sort of enforced, and a lot of it will then be taken out of our hands, and local authorities will be instructed by government to put things in place. That means we would have very little control. So we need to keep things going as normally as possible for as long as possible to help support bereaved people, but obviously protecting ourselves and our teams.
Right. Can I just add to that? Because the other sort of problem has been, and again, it's geographically, it's been different across, I found, nationally. So in terms of cemeteries being used as parks, so whereas some authorities have had no issues and it's been manageable, allowing people to exercise, but you're not supposed to be going out to visit graves. It's not an essential visit. You should only be there for a funeral. However, people have used them as green spaces, and for years we've encouraged people to use them as green spaces, and so people exercise, they walk their dogs if they're allowed, and now so there's this bit of confusion, I think, and it hasn't really been that clear from a government perspective as to what people should or shouldn't be doing in cemeteries. But where people have had crowds, and I've had reports of kids coming in with footballs, tennis rackets. I mean, it's unbelievable. They've had to shut their gates because it's not safe. And also with the question of, you have a limit of 10 and then, 50 people, 100 people turn up, which is prevalent in some communities, about what powers people have to stop that. And actually, as people that run sites, you don't have many powers. It's the police that actually have the powers to break up gatherings. And I know in some cases, police have been called to funerals to try and disband them. And I think, again, having a risk-based approach, there's so much you can do. It's really hard to enforce as a staff member or a manager of a site. You're not going to want to get in too close to anybody. And in some situations, it may be that you just literally have to stand back and let people get on with it, because, the enforcement part, I think, is the difficult part. And if most people are sticking to it, that's great. But I know there are some sites that have had problems with large people just turning up for funerals in their own cars, coming through the gates. Very, very, very hard to manage that kind of situation. And how do you stop that from happening? I don't think there are any easy answers to those things. Other than, the police is an option, which is obviously something nobody really wants to have to do. But safety, guidance, and it's got to be priority. So I don't know if there is any straightforward answers, Julie. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, because that's one of the things I've been asked a lot as well in the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one. And I've just seen some of the comments on the chat, which says that the guidance is unclear, and I would agree with that. And the different nations in the UK have actually interpreted the regulations differently, which doesn't help either. I'm hoping that as of next week we'll have clearer guidance. We've been pushing and pushing for this. The Coronavirus Act 2020 has got some regulations made under the Act, and that's what we're working under at the moment, but they will be reviewed, or they were committed to reviewing them 3 weeks after they came in, and the 3 weeks is up today, actually. So they are now being reviewed, and guidance will be issued either late Friday or early Monday, apparently, according to the Cabinet Office. So once that's issued, hopefully we'll have a bit more clarity on whether cemeteries should be opened or closed. In the meantime, it remains, this is for cemeteries, not crematoria, which should be closed, but for cemeteries, they can remain open. Equally, you have the power to close them if they are becoming a problem. So if people are congregating in the cemeteries, causing problems for you, then you can actually decide to shut the gates. You don't have to. You can keep them open if they're not causing a problem, then that's fine. But also remember that people have been told to stay at home, except for specific circumstances. And visiting graves at the moment is not one of those circumstances that people should be leaving home for. Attendance at a funeral in limited circumstances is, but just visiting a grave or visiting a book of remembrance or a memorial in a garden of remembrance is not one of the reasons that people can leave home.
And there's some comments there, Julie, that people have put up with just regards to what they're doing. So in the interest of time, I'll not read all those out, but there's a good one there from Mary Bobby, who's saying, due to people coming in and walking dogs and exercising and bringing children, they have closed the gates, but they're offering to take photographs and send those to the family. So after a burial, with the flowers on the grave and everything, they're offering to do that because they can't let the people in. So I thought that was
that's lovely to hear, actually. Well done. I think that's a really nice nice solution to that particular problem, isn't it?
Okay. One other, Peter O'Connell, we have 2 public footpaths running through our churchyard, so he's not sure that closure would be legally possible in his case.
Probably not. If it's a public footpath, that might be different. Again, I think, you know, if it's not causing a problem, if this, you know, the churchyard has been used respectfully and it's not contributing to breaching the government guidelines, then you wouldn't want to close it anyway. Mm-hmm. It's difficult, as Sophia said. We're not here to police what the government are saying. We can only set our sort of policies and what have you around what the government is saying. But if people are breaching it but are not causing you a specific problem, then I wouldn't rush to closing your cemeteries. If it is causing you a problem and it's putting your own grounds teams and your grave diggers at risk, then I would consider shutting the cemeteries. But as I say, you know, if it's the odd person popping in to visit a grave as part of their daily hours exercise, then that's not necessarily causing a problem. So again, it's that local risk-based approach, isn't it? If you've got groups of kids in there playing football, causing damage to headstones, you know, we've had some horrible things heard, groups of kids kind of spitting on people and, you know, just really horrible things. If that's happening, then you may want to consider taking more, you know, drastic action, like shutting the cemeteries. So again, it kind of remains a local risk-based option for you.
Brilliant, thanks, Julie. I have a few more questions, Neil. Or should I?
Yeah, go ahead, Leona. Yes.
I'll go back. One from Graham Harrison. Question from the ICCM Northern Branch: has the CREM 10 form been amended to reflect COVID-19, as some medical referees have been asking?
No, there's been no amendment to any of the cremation forms. I'm not quite sure why Form 10 would need to be amended. Perhaps if Graham can elaborate on that, that would be good. But as of yet, no, there's been no change to any of the cremation forms except for the scrapping of Form 5, which actually was recommended in the Broderick report in 1969, was it? I can't remember now, and was never implemented. And it's taken this unfortunate pandemic situation to enable Form 5 to be scrapped. It's only a temporary measure, of course.
Right. Okay. One from Helen, Leona, do you think?
Yeah, we're preparing for a greater number of interments. However, our main concern is grave digger capacity. It was mentioned just now that we could dig plots ahead of time. How would we facilitate this? And does this have any issues on the ground? How far ahead of time could we dig plots?
Okay, yes, there could be some issues. The best thing to do is to try and find out from your local resilience forum what the modelling is for your area. So how many more graves are you going to need? If it's only, you know, 2 or 3 more, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. If it's going to be 30, 40 more, and you're only doing, you know, 20 a year, that could be an issue. One of the big problems with an increased number of burials is groundwater, and there's an absolute need, particularly in a pandemic situation, to make sure that groundwater is not affected by an excess number of burials. And the Environment Agency have good advice on this on their website. If in doubt, contact the Environment Agency. It may be that you need to, if you're doing a lot more burials, you need to put contingency measures in place. So if anyone's got any specific concerns, if you want to drop me in or Sophia an email, we can have a look at those for you. In terms of digging ahead, I know some authorities have already done that. Obviously, security is really important. So if you're going to leave graves open, they must be adequately shored, and they should have a proper protective covering, ideally a locking lid, or if not, some form of protection. and fencing round so that people can't just wander in and have a look what's going on or accidentally fall into the grave. So I think the first thing to do is to kind of try and estimate how many extra graves you will need and when they are likely to be needed, and then they can be dug, and as long as they're adequately shored and protected, they can be left for as long as you need them.
I think our recent newsletter gives some guidance on a ground risk assessment. So, your cemetery should undertake a risk assessment, and there are specialised companies that can do that for groundwater. There is some government guidance as well, which gives you some information, more detailed information about the risk assessment and groundwater and what you can and can't do with the Environment Agency. So, I mean, even before this, we were saying every cemetery should have a risk assessment to see where they sit within that. But obviously, it's not everyone has that. I do know that. So in this case, I think it would be really wise to get that done first.
Right.
Thank you. I'll go to one from Debbie Stevens. I deal with public health funerals under our environmental health department. With our cemeteries officer deals with the public health funerals. We do not have a crematorium in our area. I was wondering, from a public health funeral side of things, are the government going to put in place measures should they rocket up in numbers that they will say it should be cremation only rather than burial?
Possibly. I would hope not, because that takes away people's choice. There was in the Coronavirus Act, there is provision for that, but the Cabinet Office have committed to maintaining the choice of burial or cremation for as long as they possibly can. So I would hope we wouldn't be forced into cremating people only under the Public Health Act, and that burial would still remain an option for people. I've been asking regularly at meetings I have with the Ministry of Justice and the Cabinet Office and the Department of Health and Social Care and the Ministry of Housing, what was it, MHCS, I don't know, whatever,
Yeah.
the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And I keep banging on about public health funerals and the fact that the numbers are likely to increase, because there's going to be a lot of families really badly affected by not only losing family members and having to pay for funerals, but also possibly not having a job at the moment, or been on furlough, or been on a very reduced income. And I think that's going to lead to a larger number being referred to the local authority to carry out. Ideally, there would be some help available from central government for this, because in these circumstances, it's very unlikely that that any money could be recovered by the local authority in the normal way for undertaking these public health funerals. So I'm hoping that at some point somebody will listen and actually come up with some sort of plan for helping local authorities deal with any excess public health funerals. I think you had a lot of questions this week, Sophia, about that.
I did, yeah. It's been Public Health Week, Funeral Week.
Yeah. Which indicates that numbers are increasing, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note there are other organisations where people can get help if they didn't go down that route, like the Quakers organisation, and there's lots of charities and funding, extra funding, which we can signpost you to should any one of your families want more information. So there are other organisations out there to help, but inevitably, like you say, people may lose more than one member of their family as well at the same time. So it financially becomes very pressurised. So yeah, I've had a lot of inquiries about public health funerals. I think they are going to increase, I think just because of affordability, but like I said, there are good charities out there that can help with some of those costs.
Yeah. And the DWP increased the payment on the 8th of April. So the elements of the DWP payment that pays towards the funeral director's costs increased from £700 to £1,000, which will help. It's still not a lot of money, but it might help families. And they're also looking at streamlining the application process and making it quicker, because obviously that can be key in helping funerals to be arranged. And sometimes it can take a very long time for an answer to be given as to whether somebody can actually get a payment or not. but they're looking to speed that process up significantly. So the DWP are doing what they can do, but they're massively struggling at the moment themselves, because they've had something like 1.5 million new applications for universal credit since the lockdown began, and yet a lot of their staff are also off self-isolating or poorly. So they're doing their best, but obviously they're under pressure like everybody else.
I think to be able to claim that, though, Julie, you have to be under certain benefits, don't you? You have to be receiving certain benefits. It's not for everybody that can claim on that. So
no, there is a gap. If you're not on benefits, then there's very little help or virtually no help available. If people are on certain types of benefits, then they can apply to the funeral payments, apply for a funeral payment from the DWP. But there's going to be a lot of people that fall through that gap. So they might not be on benefits, but they've got no money, particularly at the moment, because they might not be able to work, but they're not on benefit, and there's little help available to them, which is why I think a lot will end up going to the local authority for a public health funeral.
Right. There's a question there from Lynn, but probably before we get to that, Leona, there's did we cover the comment there from Peter? Yes, we did. And then there's one from Elaine Williamson, who's a comment on which goes back to a previous conversation we had, and there's something there from Monica as well. Leona, would you just mind relaying that to the guys, just in case anybody's not seen that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll actually jump. Lynn's was more of a comment just on the earlier point of digging graves in advance. So what they're doing is in Bridge North Cemetery, where the ground can be particularly difficult to dig out because it's sandstone, they have dug out a large number of graves in advance, but then infilled them so that if and when they're required quickly, they'll be much easier to dig out.
Yeah,
that's a good solution. Thank you for sharing that. That's an option. It makes them safer as well. So they're not open for people to accidentally have a look in or fall down.
Very good. Thank you.
Good point, thank you. Monica, it has appeared that some burials were COVID-19 related, but this information was not provided to us at the time of booking. It was mostly related to the deaths occurred at home or nursing homes. Our contractor suggested to use temporary ropes for all burials in order to reduce the risk of transmission. What's your opinion on this?
It's an option, yeah. I think we need to keep things in perspective, and people are much more likely to contract the virus from somebody who's living than from somebody who's passed away. The virus will die pretty much with the body, and after probably 72 hours, there's very little chance of being infected by somebody who's died with COVID-19. And certainly, by the time, unless the burial is immediately following the death, or very soon following the death, by the time it comes to be buried, the infection risk is very low. The most likely source of infection would be if somebody has handled the coffin who is infected. So it may be that the protection then is perhaps using ropes that can be left in the handles and buried in the grave. That would certainly be an option. But I think again it has to be sort of on a risk assessment basis. Sophia, I think we've had this a few times, haven't we? We've been asked this.
Yeah, that, and also I think I suppose it's a bit scaremongering of what people actually think this COVID-19 is. So I've had people say, well, they won't dig double depth, it'll only be single depth, they won't reopen graves, they're going in full white suits like it's the bubonic plague. And I think it is about getting it into proportion. And I've even heard some people say they won't even allow a funeral if the person has died of COVID-19. So again, it didn't make any sense to me, because they would allow a funeral if someone died of cancer, say, but they wouldn't allow a funeral for COVID-19. It's not the person that's died you can catch it from, it's the living that are attending the funerals, whether it's the person's died of cancer or COVID-19 is almost irrelevant. It's about practicing social distancing, good hygiene, with every single burial or cremation. It shouldn't make a difference. And I've also had that about reopening graves. Is it safe to reopen a grave? Do I put a concrete slab down? You know, I've had a multiple of different, and it's no different, you know, because often with burial, you don't know what someone's died of anyway in the normal, you know, normal circumstances. So you should just treat it the same way as you would treat any burial, the same precaution, the same PPE. Like Julie said, once they're in, once they've got to the cemetery, time has passed, so it's very low risk from catching anything from the deceased person. And once they've been in the ground for that length of time, by the time they reopen it, there is virtually no risk. You know, you shouldn't be disturbing that coffin anyway, so there should be 6 inches of earth on top. So there is no risk to reopening a grave of somebody that's died of COVID-19. But I've had a bit of a sort of far panic end of, like I said, like it's the bubonic plague, and I think it's about getting it into proportion and just being sensible about what this disease actually is. But I think it's only notifiable because they want to know the numbers, not necessarily because it's infectious after you know, open the grave or anything. It's notifiable for data reasons more than anything else. And I think that's, again, where the confusion lies sometimes. That information's not getting across to a lot of people.
And on that note, Megan Wilson's asking, could I ask for guidance surrounding a shroud burial? Is there any different recommendations there?
No, as far as I'm aware, there's no restriction on using a shroud rather than a coffin. I will double check that with our funeral directing colleagues to see if they've received any specific advice, but as far as I'm aware, there should be no issue with shroud burial, but I will double check that. Is that Megan at Tunbridge Wells?
Yes.
Right, cool. I'll send you an email, Megan.
I do know that, you know, just my conversations with Eternal Gardens at Kemnal Park, and they've got obviously a huge Muslim burial area, that they're still carrying out shroud burials. And they're the first ones that have just done trench burials, and they're still doing shroud burials. So it doesn't appear to be any difference in that as far as we're aware.
Yeah, and I think they're still allowed to wash the body before, subject to wearing appropriate PPE. Because there was a suggestion initially, I think, that people should not be handling the body any more than it needed to be. But actually, that's been relaxed slightly, and the Public Health England guidance is that ritual washing can still take place as long as the people doing it are wearing appropriate PPE. So, as I say, I can't see an issue with the shroud burial. But I will double check that.
Thank you. I think I've got to the end of the questions, although there's a few comments there which you can read out as to what people are doing, seeing an increase in diaries there for non-COVID-19 related deaths, and people bringing funerals forward as they're worried then they won't get a service maybe later on.
Great. Can those comments be collated, Leona?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We can pull them all together and share them with you. And one of the questions which, Neil, I'm sure you're going to go on to there is about if the frequently asked questions on your site aren't being updated, where would they get the information? But you're continually updating the site, Julie.
We as soon as anything new comes in, we issue a newsletter and update the relevant page on the website. So you can see on the recent posts, there's a list of things that have gone on recently, and I add the date that I put them on for most things. So you can see Scotland COVID-19 was updated on the 14th of April. That was the last time we had communication from the Scottish Government. And below that, I think there's keep going down a bit, Neil, if you can. Yeah, COVID-19 updated 15th of April. So I tried to put the date that it was last updated, and then that would have been a member newsletter. You can see on there an ICCN newsletter to members. So although we're not updating the FAQ as much as we would have liked to have done, we still are getting the information out to members as soon as we know anything, and we'll continue to do that. And if we get to a point where we're getting regular FAQs again, or regularly asked questions. We will continue to update the FAQ section. I'm sorry that we haven't been able to. It's just been it's been a kind of crazy time for all of us, I know. But we will get the information out to members as soon as we get anything new.
Can I also just add the deceased management group? That's also the links on our website. There's a website for the DMAG. So if you have a look down after the Scotland, scroll up on the right hand side. It says Deceased Management Advisory. That's it. Yeah. If you click on that, there's a link to their website there. And that has a lot of guidance because we're part of that group too. So, and included in that, there is stuff for funeral directors, and sometimes there's a bit of a crossover if you want just more general information. Sometimes it's useful to know what's going on from a funeral directing point of view because they are your customers, you're talking to them a lot, and they'll be telling you things as well which don't necessarily directly affect you from their point of view, but it's always good to know what's going on. So these organisations you can see on the screen are all part of this group that have these regular and this gives you a lot of guidance as well, sort of mirrors what we're doing, guidance for funeral directors section. So I found that really useful as well for giving out information, more information for people. Yeah,
and the government, obviously the government website contains the general information for everybody. Not just our sector, obviously, but you know how people should be social distancing, staying at home, self-isolating where necessary, frequent hand washing, all the usual stuff. So there's plenty of information on the government website for general how to deal with the pandemic. And I think I said on the last webinar, and I'll say again, that it's so important to look after your own health during this period, both physical and mental health. And our website has resources that you can use to help with relaxation and self-care, taking some time out. And if anybody feels the need for some extra support, we do have an agreement in place with Heart-Led Wellbeing to provide telephone and face-to-face support if required.
Absolutely, thank you, Julie, and a great resource for everybody who may avail of that. Following on from what these guys just shared regarding further resources and so on, there's another forum which we've launched. It's Plotbox Connect. Again, not commercial in any way. It's very much sharing, learning based, so kind of peer-to-peer kind of sharing and recommendation. So should the conversation want to continue, it's not necessarily guidance oriented in the same way that some of those others are. It's very much kind of peer-to-peer and asking for advice and sharing information. So we can make this link available to you guys. So there's for each territory, there's the UK and Ireland, and then the channels for contingency planning and so on. So for any topic that you might have, just feel free to jump into here, post a question, answer a question, share advice, whatever it might be. So that's there for you guys as well. And again, that's not in any way about Plotbox. It's just a forum which we're sharing for you guys. Okay, I think we're done with. I think that's questions done. We're approaching the hour mark. Another wonderful session from our partners at the ICCM. So thank you, Julie and Sophia, for that. That was again very good, and I have to say a really engaged audience today. Really well attended. A record, I think, for the UK. So just goes to show the value that these are bringing, and thanks to everybody for giving up your time to both attend and be panelists. Any closing comments?
All I would say is that if anyone has any additional questions that they've not thought of during this this webinar session, or they need additional support, I mean, we're all available, email, phone calls. We are here to support people. We don't always have all the answers. If we don't, we will try and find them. So, if you want even shared experiences. So what I found just by talking to members and knowing what other people are doing, there is a comfort in knowing that we're all in the same boat. And, this is the first time for a lot of us. So You know, if anyone's got any other questions, please email me, Julie, Matt, or other officer, and we'll be happy to try and find out the answers for you.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, we'd like to say thank you for all that you're doing out there on the front line. You're doing an excellent job. I know it's hard for everyone at the moment, but please take some comfort from the fact that it is appreciated. We might not get clapped every Thursday, but there are some nice comments on social media about funeral workers. So well done and keep up the great work.
Absolutely. And Liz, Sheena, Beverly, Kevin, Elaine, Helen and Megan, thank you. Thank you for your thanks. So thanks to everybody. We appreciate it. We're glad that's been of value.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, guys, take care. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.